All right. So yeah, we are recording. Let's get into it. So yeah, thanks, Mike, for joining and offering to demo FastGen today. I know, I think you reached out to me on LinkedIn when you saw my tools post, which to be honest, I was like digging that day and I found a bunch, but it's very hard to tell the difference between is it an API builder? Is it a connector? Is it just another like automation tool? Because there's so many products being built in this space right now. And I've also used something called Tray.io in the past, which is not exactly an API builder, but it's like a more an enterprise automation tool, which I use as an API because you can hack its way around it. But I'm very excited to learn about your tool, FastGen. The interface looks amazing. And especially because we run into some limitations with tools like Zapier and Make when it comes to more like advanced connectivity and querying the database and whatnot. So could you like maybe start by telling us a little bit about what is this tool about? How did the idea come about? And what's your vision with this?
Sure. Yeah. So, hey everyone, I'm Mike, CEO of FastGen, and we founded FastGen roughly 9 months ago. It was a very, almost like a smooth transition from our last startup to this one with the same co-founding team. We even rehired our first 4 software engineers. So basically like a core team of 7, just like shipping stuff very quickly and building something that we would have liked to have at our last company. So the last company that we built was a fintech. It was called Blair. We were in the student financing space. We raised like hundreds of millions of dollars, invested in students, but we built the technological infrastructure for it. And an issue that we ran into a lot of times was we had so many stakeholders and so many different products to build. It was really hard to just keep up with the demand in terms of all the things that we had to ship. So every now and then, like our core code base, we wrote on our own. And then every now and then we try to use tooling to figure out how can we move faster. Sometimes we use, for example, like Webflow to spin up landing pages even faster. And then also use Webflow to have our less technical or non-technical people make changes on the landing pages without like our core engineering team being involved. And then we try to do similar things when it comes to setting up backends. And we struggle to find a tool that would help us accelerate our progress in the same way there. So that was basically the origin story or the reason why we decided to build FastGen and not one of the other 10 ideas that we had. So we looked into lots of different things, but this one was just like, we knew that we would be able to build a great product. We had the pain ourselves and we could just start building pretty quickly. So that's the origin story, maybe a little more about what we want to build. Mm-hmm. So we call ourselves a low-code backend, which is a very broad term. And the analogy that we like to use, it's not perfect, but I think it's like pretty good to get an understanding, is that what Webflow has achieved for the front end, mm-hmm. we want to do for the backend. Because nowadays you can build almost like anything you want in the front end with Webflow, right? Especially if you inject custom code into it. And I just use myself as an example, right? I could build a website. I could just write the stuff on my own, but I don't like to do it anymore. Like I just like to use Webflow for a lot of boilerplate work. Yes, exactly. And sometimes I export the code and then I do tweaks on my own and host it if I want to. But the most straightforward thing is just use Webflow, build the landing page. If I want to inject some code, I'll do it. It depends. Sometimes I need it, sometimes I don't. And it's not one-to-one applicable to what a backend looks like. But there's like a very good like analogy because we want to simplify setting up APIs. We want to simplify running cron jobs. We want to simplify just like the whole boilerplate, the whole infrastructure stuff that you have to still do when you deal with the backend. It has gotten way better over the last couple of years, but it's still not even close to where the front end is nowadays. There's so many cool front end builders. And yeah, so basically that's the core thing that's driving us. Just making sure that building backends gets like as easy as building front ends. And that's like the longer term vision. And what we started with is, I'll show you later, but we do have a pretty solid foundation where we have a visual API builder. We have a database, a hosted Postgres database. You can also connect your own Postgres database if you want, but we have a hosted version. And then with the same UI as with the API builder, you can also build cron jobs. So like scheduled jobs if you want to time something. And there's like more in the platform, but that's like the core of it.
Got it. That sounds pretty fascinating. So it sounds like you're trying to almost scratch your own itch that came out from being in a fast-paced development environment where we're trying to ship a lot of stuff, move fast. There was a lot of demand, but you just ended up in the same situation that most startups end up in, where there's just more to do than the resources available, and then things don't get done, and then there's just all this pressure. So you're trying to almost find an easier way to achieve those same goals now that we know the power of building with visual drag and drop tools like Webflow. So you're trying to do almost the same for the backend, it sounds. And on that note, did you do? So I know it's like scratching your own itch, but was there any like market research involved in like the demand for such tools and what existed already out there that you tried?
Yeah, definitely. So before we even started building, we talked to lots of different people, both in the startup scene, at like larger companies. We talked with basically lots of different people who build. Like how we think about it is there's like builders out there who like building products can be in so many different ways. We talked to 60 of them like before we even did anything. And we just asked them, like, what is your stack? How are you building it? If you run into this issue, what would you do? And just like, try to really deeply understand how they would solve this. And we noticed that there were very similar frustrations to those that we encountered. One great example is sometimes you want to set up like a very simple API gateway or some simple API. Then you have to go into AWS and then you struggle with the configurations. You can theoretically just do anything in there,
Right.
but it isn't as simple as you might want it to be. And then it takes way more time. And then you also need to maintain it over time. So basically, we noticed that like many of the frustrations that we had when we tried to achieve our goals at the company were also shared with others. And we did look at the market. And the interesting thing about the market is that at the same time, it's like crowded because there's so many tools, right? But it's also so large and there's so many different perspectives with how you can look at it that there's so much value to capture still. So let's like talk about, for example, you in our conversation earlier on, you mentioned automations, right? There's like several pretty big, good automation tools like Zapier for like on the lower code end, Make in like the middle, let's say.
Right.
And there's like stuff like Tray.io, which like you can like build like more enterprise ready stuff. And then there's like things like even Appian or OutSystems who are like more than just automation tools, but they're like really like enterprise focused things. So, and what we do is not necessarily automation, but some people use us for automations because you can theoretically do that, but that's not like the core thing that we focus on. So it's not like you have like a Google Sheets and then something happens in the Google Sheets and then you sync that data to your Airtable or whatever, to use like just a very simple Zapier example, right? Like it's a little more complex and it's a little more focused on stuff that happens programmatically. So it's not that like the stuff that we do is like replacing manual labor that much. It's more like on the API layer. So if like a customer of yours is clicking something, then that might be fed into FastGen and you do something with it. But yeah, so you have the automation space and then you also have the, let's call it lower code backend space, right? There's a couple of companies there. There's like Backendless, there's Backfire, there's Xano or Xano. Like everyone pronounces it differently, so I'm not sure. And so they're like, and even there's a spectrum, right? For example, Xano is like pretty much no code and very good if you don't have a technical understanding and pretty powerful for that. But if you don't have any technical understanding, for example, you shouldn't use FastGen. You need to have at least a semi-technical understanding. You need to understand some JSON. You need to understand what an API is. But like from semi-technical onwards, like you can do a lot of stuff really fast with FastGen. So it's like the no-code, low-code space for backend specifically. And then you have let's call them the big boys, right? Theoretically, we also compete with parts of AWS or Google Cloud because you can just build like a cloud function for it if you want, or a Lambda function. So I think what I want to say is the space is very big and broad, but there's so much value to capture if you build a product that solves something that people want to have solved. And we definitely see that there's people who really what we are doing, and we're still at the beginning, right? We do have a lot of functionality already, and I would say that we ship pretty fast, but the shipping speed just accelerates, and we like launch more and more features that just extend what's possible. So the best example is, like, even a couple of days ago, we launched our custom code blog. So now you can use JavaScript with Node or Python within our environment, and you can just deploy it super quick. And that just extends the possibilities of what's possible. So
practically makes it infinite.
But you get the gist of it.
Yeah, no, I got it. Just to comment on that code block, and actually, funny enough, that's what I realized in Trade.io as well. Anytime there's a gap, you can quickly fill it with a code block. And so by adding that, you practically make it infinite possibilities. Like now you're no longer restricted. So I think you're right in saying that this is not a no-code tool like Xano, which is, I'm actually not sure if you can do code blocks in Xano, but you're definitely in the more low-code space where you need some understanding, but you don't need to be as technical as like a fully trained software engineer to be working in AWS. You fall somewhere in the middle. So it makes a lot of sense. I totally understand the requirement too as a user myself, but who's your target user base? Are you like targeting startups, like big companies, individuals? Like what are you trying to like market towards?
Yeah. So currently we have 3 main customer groups. And like with many companies, we are the same, like it changes, it will change over time. So currently the main customer groups are all like, let's call the first one indie hackers. It's just individuals that are building products that are might launch in one product hunt. They want to get from 0 to 1 really quickly. They want to make passive income with it. It can be hobby projects. It can be like full-time, like indie hackers. This is like the first bucket. Then the second bucket is startups. So just like tech first companies whose goal it is to grow very fast. That's also where we are originally from, right? We did YC with this company. We did YC with our last company. And we know the startup space extremely well. So startups definitely the second group, and it's not in like rank order. It's just like the 3 groups. So startups, and then lastly, we do have agencies and freelancers who are using us, who are building stuff for their clients usually, and then they use FastGen in some capacity, sometimes internally, but also sometimes for their clients. We do have some like bigger companies doing stuff on FastGen, but that's currently not the target, because once you target enterprise, you need to add some functionality that's not relevant for anyone else. You need to get certificates that are not relevant for anyone else. So enterprises do use it for some stuff, but we are not like fully enterprise ready and can do the traditional enterprise sales right now. But that's like a thing that probably will appear more like next year and the year afterwards.
Got it. Okay, that was going to be my follow-up question, because enterprise brings a whole lot of different challenges when it comes to compliance and security and all those things. So it's just a different level of headache, even as a developer, and I'm sure as a tool developer as well. So that's not the target audience right now. Got it. What about because if you especially target the indie startup and agency space, pricing obviously is a key. So where are you in that when it comes to pricing? Like how far can someone get just with the free version?
Yeah, so it really depends on what you're building. So how we think about, what our philosophy is when it comes to pricing is that if you just use it to play around, you shouldn't pay. If you use it for a small hobby project, you shouldn't pay. Once you start using it in a professional context and get more usage out of it, and you actually capture economic value from it, then we want you to start paying. Not a lot. There's some people who just have smaller commercial projects, but then that's like basically the barrier of like where like payment starts. But we also like our first plan is also like pretty cheap. Like it's, if you pay annually, I think $12, otherwise it's 15 per month. So it's not super expensive, but that's like the jump. And then with like more usage and more scale, it just scales up. And then we have some features that are only relevant for bigger teams. Like for example, working in the same workspace with multiple people, which an indie hacker doesn't need, or like even a freelancer doesn't need. But once you are like growing as a startup, you might want to have multiple people in there. So the team plan is a bit more expensive. But yeah, how we think about the whole pricing thing is that we want to grow with our customers. And if they are successful, we want to be successful. That's how we think about it. I learned that at Stripe, where I worked like basically straight out of college. Like they did that a lot. They had some of their biggest customers, like back then, they started with when they were very early. So that's also a little how we think about it. It's like a long-term play.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I think just last question before we get into the demo, on the team setup, one thing that I faced early on with Trey and also with some of these other no-code tools was the sort of support for version control. which was pretty frustrating coming from a software background. Everything was a Git commit, like I did 10 commits a day, but here then all of a sudden you lose that ability. Is that something that you're thinking about or built into the tool already, or it's coming up?
I'll show you in a bit.
Okay, perfect. So that will
Yeah.
answer my question then. So yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm happy to let's get into the demo. Would love to see the basics and how to build something. If you have a use case in mind, let's do it.
Yeah, let me share my screen. And then my idea is I'll show you like a couple of basic things. I'll lead you through some of our templates. And then if you have any questions, you can just let me know.
Okay, sounds good.
So you should be seeing my screen right about now.
Yep, I see it.
Okay, great. So on a high level, let me start with that. We have 4 different sections in FastGen right now. We're actually launching a 5th next week, but you'll see that next week.
Okay.
So we have the API section where you can build and list all your APIs, like any REST API that you want to build. We have the workflow section where you can build cron jobs. So if you want to schedule something every hour or every Tuesday night at 1 a.m. Eastern time, you can do that in here. And you can also chain together things because we have event-based workflows as well, where you can just define like something like a function, and then you can call it in other APIs or other scheduled jobs. We have the database, which is a hosted Postgres database, and we have the logs where you just see what happened in your APIs and workflows. But let's actually start with the APIs because that's the feature that most people are using the most. I'll show you just a little bit in terms of what the environment looks like, and then I'll just lead you through a couple of examples.
Got it.
Let's say you want to create like a post request. This is the environment that you're working in. And then you have this drag and drop functionality over here where you can use flow controls to add logic. So you can do if conditions, and then you can use the action blocks to, I always say the flow control adds like logic and structure, and the action blocks do things to, to make it like very simple.
Yeah.
And I'll give you actual examples, but I just want to show you what it looks and feels like to build this. So you can just drop these things in here. You can loop through stuff. You can also nest things. You can get to like very like decent complexity pretty soon. But let's start up here. This is our top action. And in this case, it's an API route. You can just name the API route whatever you want. Let's call it no code university. And here we just call the URL path university. You can do authentication if you want. We'll just set this to public to make it a little easier. You can set in some validation rules, but we don't need this right now. And then you save it. And then this up here is your endpoint. So you can use that, like basically, if we wanted to, we can deploy it right now down here. And now you could use it, like theoretically. There's nothing happening yet, but it's really fast. And then down here, you can add additional like stuff to it. And we are adding more of those actions basically on a weekly basis. And let me actually show you 1 or 2 examples that we can use. So
yeah,
let's say we want to use ChatGPT to, in a very basic example, to tell us what recipe we can build with ingredients that we give to ChatGPT. So let's say, please let me know what recipes I can use these ingredients for. And then what you can do, you can also always reuse variables. So in this case, you click this, and then you can use the inputs from your body. We haven't defined those yet, but we just call those ingredients, and we save it. Then we put a success message in here, call it success. And then we can, again, result. Now we just want to display it potentially in our front end or something. And we can, again, just use the variable. This time we use steps.recipe.output, which is the output of the ChatGPT action. And we save it real quick. And now we can simulate it in our debug mode. So one of my favorite features of FastGen is our debug mode right here, where we can just click on it. And then let's test the draft route without any input so far. This takes a bit longer because ChatGPT is like writing. So apparently everything worked because everything's green. And now we can click on the action and see what happens. So in this case, we didn't give it any input. So it says, oh, I couldn't do anything. Sorry for that. So let's try it again with some input. Let's say we want to do ingredients. And then we want to say, this would be usually coming from your front end or whatever, but we are just simulating it right now. Let's say tomatoes, cheese, I don't know, chicken and water. I'm not a good cook, but let's see what ChatGPT
Let's see what it cooks up. Yeah.
let's see what it can do with it. So again, it usually is a bit faster, but ChatGPT just like it needs to like generate the content. This is also, you can use different versions of ChatGPT, and you can also make it apparently maybe it was too long. Let me check. Sometimes GPT is a bit finicky.
Yeah. You have to regenerate several times in some cases.
Yeah, exactly. I can show you like a couple of other examples that are a bit faster.
One thing I noticed was you didn't ask for an OpenAI API key.
Oh yeah,
because yours is already
that's already in here in this specific example. I think it worked this time. Oh yeah, here are a few recipes. Oh no, it's there. Yeah, ChatGPT sometimes it's just like a bit slow. So apparently we can do chicken parmesan. We can do some. Basically, it doesn't really matter. It just gives us the output. And now let me show you some like more interesting stuff. One cool thing before we leave is we have a lot of shortcuts within FastGen as well. So one of my favorite ones is using open square brackets to remove the sidebar, because it just gives you way more screen real estate to work with. So that's one of them. And now let me show you one of our templates, show you something a little more complex. Let's do the waitlist lead generation thing. So basically, if we click one of the templates, what happens is it generates like this API template. In this case, it also generates a database template for you. And we have Slack connected. I'll just choose a channel right here so that it doesn't tell me that there's an error. And what happens in this thing is someone signs up on a website for a lead list. They just express interest. Then we check in the database, does this user already exist? If it does not exist, we add it to the database. We tell Slack, hey, there's a new potential lead. You should definitely say hello to them. And then with the email action, we say, hello, thanks for signing up for the lead generation. Not for the lead. Thanks for signing up for our product. We'll be in touch soon. And let's try this out. So we can go into debug mode again. Let's just test it real quick. This time, oh yeah, there was no email in here because we didn't put any input in. That's a good sign to show you what it looks like when there's an error, right?
Yeah.
So basically when there's an error, you see it because it's red. And let's see what we need in here together. I think we just need to define the email. It's inputs.buddy.email. That's good. And here, this is our SQL. So we have first name, last name, and email in this example. That would be sent from the front end. And we can simulate this again in here. So we have first name. And let's say we just use my name, Mike. Use last name. And we use, Malco. And then we use email, which is, I don't know, Mike@test. Okay. Sometimes I have to switch between my German keyboard and my US keyboard, which is a bit of a struggle. Okay, let's see if this works better. So we still get an error. Let's see what the error is. Referenced entity doesn't exist. Okay, not sure what the problem is. Maybe let's just delete the email for now. Oh, I know what the error is. I haven't set up my SMTP email. Let's use SendGrid for the email real quick. Send email. So this one should be inputs.buddy email. Apparently my SendGrid account also deconnected. So let's just kick the email and let's try it again. Let's test it. There we go. The user exists because it's already in the database.
Right.
Let's use your name and then see what it looks like. There we go. Now the other thing works. See, we solved it together. Yeah, sometimes connecting. I just don't want to show you the connecting stuff because it's a bit annoying. So basically, you get the gist of it, and then I can show you what it looks like in the database by hopping over.
So actually, before you go to the database, a couple of questions I had was, so on the add to database, you showed me a query. Did FastGen create that query, or that's like handwritten?
That is handwritten, but we are launching a SQL AI copilot where you can just tell it what to write, and then it writes it for you, and it knows your database schema.
Okay, got it. So anytime you're doing anything with a DB, you are writing the sort of the query. So that's where we are in the low code kind of domain, as you mentioned.
Yes, exactly. But you can use natural language for that pretty soon.
Okay, yeah, that's great. That would be helpful. The other one is, so once I've built a block like this, where maybe it's add to DB, or I have a welcome email block, which is common between many different workflows, could I save that block and then reuse it in other workflows?
You currently can save blocks. That's still on the roadmap. You can save like full flows and reference them. So
Got
the
it.
workaround right now would be you use this create event block right here. Then you can give this, let's call it event. And then you just call this, I don't know, weather API if you want to check this. And then in the event-based block, you can define a full flow. And then every time you call this thing called weather API, then it would be called. So that's the workaround. So you can only have this one thing in there, and then you can just call it whenever you want.
So it's almost like a function, and it takes a detour, goes there, does that,
Yes,
and then
exactly.
it'll wait on the response to proceed to the next step.
Yes.
Got it.
That's exactly how it would work. And yeah, one cool thing, again, because I love shortcuts, we can like click on the database, but we can also just, if we know the name of the database table, we can just press Control K and then our command bar opens, and then we just call and we go to leads, and then we see this is what we just put into the database. There's like some test stuff. This was when we didn't define it, and these were the last ones. And then you can go back to the API again by just pressing Command K and enter, because then it always shows you the last thing that you worked on. And now if we want to switch to a different API, that was not the API. This is the API. We can basically just switch around between different things in the platform super fast, which again doesn't add functionality, but I personally love it because I love everything that makes me faster.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So in the end, so what you just showed here is like one endpoint, right? So the whole,
Yes.
so what if I also had the get version of this and then the update version of this? So those I'm building independently, I assume. But is there a way to connect them all and bucket them in or group them in into a single like folder almost to see all my sort of waitlist related endpoints and create documentation on top of that? Is that something that's possible right now?
No, not right now, but folder creation is something that we are literally working on. Like we're working on a little bit of a revamp of like how things are organized. That will improve it a little and make it easier to like group things as well.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, and then one thing that you mentioned earlier was version control. So we don't have like full Git-like version control, but we have something that gets like a little bit into the direction of it. So I'll show you an example. Let's actually add a block right here. It doesn't have to work. It just have to be a random block. And let's actually add it right here. And then we go in here and we test it. No, we haven't deployed it. Let's see. Okay. So basically now you see this new block here, right? On the left side. And you can go back to see old versions right here. So you will always see the old versions. And then in the old versions, even you can click, see the error, and basically just understand what was happening before. So you have a full log of everything. In the logs, it's like even longer, but even here you see like the different versions of it. And you can make like changes to it. You see what input you passed, what you changed about it, etc.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. Could you name it also? Like the V11 to something else, or?
Currently, you can't name it. It's automatically named.
Got it.
But that's actually a good point. We should probably add. I'll write that down.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's like easy to find things when they're named.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah. So the API, there's way more functionality right here. You can do more stuff, but that's like the rough basis of what the API can do. You can like zoom in, you can zoom out. There's like a shortcut that always brings you back if you press Control B. So there's a little more there. There's like more action blocks here. I think the most important thing is you can build basically any REST API with a custom code. You can extend the functionality to almost anything. You can even install packages in the custom code. So if you need like an npm package or something, you can install it. And with the HTTP request, you can connect to any API that you have access to. Basically, as long as you like can authenticate with it, you can use it with the HTTP request. We have like a GraphQL action if you need to do anything there. And the database query interacts with like our database or the database that you have connected. And then we have these like basic SaaS integrations or LLM integrations that add additional value because you don't have to look up, oh, how do I have to connect to this? You just if you want to send an email with resend, you can just like connect to resend and then send it out, or an SMS with Twilio, same thing. And then there we are like working very closely with our user base to decide what we build next. So next week we'll launch a Google Sheets and Airtable integration so that you can like pipe data into those things really quickly because some of our users wanted it.
Got it. And what about the authentication to this particular API? I think you showed it briefly.
Yep.
But what are my options?
Yeah, right here, there's two main options. Number one, you can use like user groups. This will get a revamp next week, so it'll probably look different then. But yeah, you can just define only a signed-in user can access this through the auth. And then you can also use API tokens. So you can just create API tokens. I only have the test token in here, but you can create your own API tokens in the settings, and then you can use that to authenticate with it.
Okay, so this I can potentially generate a token and issue it to someone who wants to use my API and it doesn't expire?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Nice.
Yeah, I think that's most of it. So let's quickly jump into the workflows. And I want to get back my sidebar real quick because clicking sometimes is helpful. This is one of our most used templates. I'll just show it to you real quick. This is our API uptime checker. And it looks very similar, right? This is not an API. This is a scheduled job. The difference is that up here, you define is the workflow active or not. And then here in the condition, you define when it triggers. So you can say it triggers every day. You can have it trigger every hour, every minute, basically whatever you want. And then there's just like triggers on an ongoing basis. And the API uptime checker is something that like many of our customers are using to check whether their APIs are up. Sometimes like they get a Slack alert if it doesn't work. Like sometimes they like pipe data from A to B. It really depends. But let's see. Let's use like a basic one first. Does it work like this? I have to use the HTTP. Let's try that. Okay, apparently it doesn't work because I don't have the HTTP in front. I could have expected that, but I never tried it. Oh, again, German keyboard. There we go.
Yeah.
So this should work better. There we go. So apparently Google is up right now because this basically what this does is just
a ping.
Yeah, it's a ping, and then this checks is the status code 200. If it is, all good. If it isn't, you get an alert. And the cool thing is you can even do that with like our own APIs, right? You can just use, what did we just use? Let's use the delivery area one. We can just use this one, go in here, change this, save it, go to debug mode. Okay, apparently that's up. And if it wasn't up, we can simulate that real quick because we don't have the API token access in this one. So we should get an error if we deploy it and test it again. Let's see. Yep. Okay. So this one was not a 200 error. It was a 401, right? So we get an alert that says, what does it say? API is down, go fix it ASAP. So basically, you can put in whatever you want, but you get the gist of it. And then this would trigger, I think in this case, it's checked once per day, but you can basically do whatever schedule you want.
Oh, so you could potentially log, let's say it's running like every 15 minutes or something, or whatever frequency you choose, and you could log the response in a database and then potentially do some math on it as to in the last like 60 minutes, what's the up percentage.
100%.
Yes. And then alert based on that, right? Because one time could be an anomaly if you want to alert based on some metrics like TP99.
You can definitely average it and like you can run some data on it. And some of our users are doing that. They like save data in the database and then they like run some additional analysis on it afterwards.
Got it. So on that note, actually, does the pricing get impacted by how much data you're creating? Because like potentially what if I was running it every minute to check if my API is up? And that would start to add up real quick, right? And if I'm logging everything, so does that impact the pricing at all?
Currently, the data that you create is not priced. It's just the number of flows that are running that are priced. So you wouldn't want to use FastGen if you like move around petabytes of geospatial data.
Yeah.
Because then we might tell you, hey, please don't do that. Use a different service. But otherwise, we haven't had anyone who's like even close to reaching like the limits when it comes to the commercial limits, because no one is close to like actually reaching the like technical limits, but even the commercial limits, we haven't had anyone so far. We probably will have someone in the future, but so far it's been pretty clean. One quick step before we go into the database, actually, let's take a quick look at the logs, because that's a good continuation. So basically here in the logs, it's differentiated between API requests and workflows, but you see basically every single time the API is run. So we were using this earlier, right, where we tested one of the APIs, and you can filter by the type of API, or the specific endpoint is what I mean. You can also filter by the status. So let's say we only want 400 errors or only 200s. And you can also look at a specific date range as well. And then you see the input and the output over here. Yeah, here the input and here the output. And then the same with workflows, where you just get, okay, this ran, this is what happened. This is a bit long, but stuff happened here. And then one cool thing that I really like is you can click on View in Builder, and then it opens. So you see
that
the specific thing. Yes, that specific instance that ran, which is very helpful if you have a bug or someone reports a bug and you just want to figure out, hey, what's going on?
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the logs. Pretty self-explanatory, but I think still be really helpful. And then you can also resend it if you want to see if it's still down or something. And yeah, so that's it on that side. And then the database, it's a UI layer on top of Postgres. I'll just show you an example here. You can do inline edits if you want. So if I want to do this, I can do it. And yeah, but most people don't do that. Most people just use the API and then type stuff in and then potentially run some analysis on it. But
so does that also maintain the history, the update history on the records?
No, we don't have logs for this like we have for the other one. So if you want history there, you would have to save it in some other way. You can get access to the database itself. So if you want to use some additional Postgres tooling to do that, you can. But yeah, the main thing is here, you can just store your data. It's Postgres. It's pretty robust and scalable. And you can very easily also just set up new tables. I don't know, first name, maybe first name, last name, email. And then you can even define what type of entry you want to have. You can set some rules here if you want. You can say that the email has to be unique. Otherwise, it throws an error. If you want, you can use regex to be very precise. If you only want people from a university to sign up that have an @university.edu address, you can do that. But yeah, it's pretty much just UI layer on top of Postgres that you can use. And then you can also connect your own database. If you go to the settings and then click on external database, you can just put the database name in here, the host port, everything, and then you can connect to it instead of using our database. You can use environment variables in here if you want. That's a feature we launched recently. And then here you also connect to the external tools. You can connect to all these tools in here, basically similar to how you just put your API key in usually.
Do you also have a way to do lookup tables, or that would just be essentially creating another database and then querying that? If I just want to store key value pairs for something?
You mean in the database?
If I want to look up something in the workflow, what is the ID for email list name this? So am I essentially just doing a database query at that point, or?
You can just use the SQL action, the database action, use SQL, and then just get everything from the database, and then you can reuse the data in future actions.
Got it.
So if you want to get an email address from the database and then reuse it somewhere, or some variable or whatever, you can always do that.
Got it. Cool.
Wait, maybe do I have the database thing here? One cool thing is you can also test the query, and for inserts, you get just a quick success message. Again, this will be revamped a little bit next week when we add the Copilot. But and depending on what you're doing here, you also get a review, a preview of the actual row. So if you if you query something, then you actually get a preview of the database.
Okay, nice.
And yeah, that's the gist of it. You can build APIs, very flexible, especially now with the custom code action. You can build the workflows. Let me show you the event-based workflows. They're the very same as the time-based ones, but this is where you define the name. It's like basically a function name, like we talked about earlier. And then whenever you, like, this is called duplicate. So whenever you use an event-based action in here, and then you just put like duplicate in here, and whenever this action block is run through, then this specific, oh, that was the wrong one, sorry. This one. Then this thing triggers. I think we might have even triggered it. Yeah, we triggered it earlier because one of the database things was.
Oh, so you literally, so basically, just by the name of it, it is acting as a communication to this workflow that, hey, this event just took place. So now you go for it.
Yes. So basically how you can think about it, it's like you name the function duplicate, but this time it's not the function, it's like one of these like workflows. And then whenever you want to call this specific workflow, you can call it from other places by just using this unique identifier duplicate.
That's pretty cool. What are some of the use cases you're seeing for this stuff?
Yeah, it's often chaining things together. So sometimes like people want like data stored in the database, for example, from different sources. So they have it coming in from this lead form. They have it coming in from maybe like sometimes even via email. They have it coming in from like different places. And then they have this one, store this in database and do some checks there. So like they define this as a function. Sometimes it's also easier if you have like bigger things going on. You want to separate the logic a little. And so like we see like different types of use cases, but like sometimes I think the two main ones is just repeatable things that you just happen to use in many places. You just store in here, like functions. And then the other thing is sometimes people like to split up the logic a little and then have separate things.
Got it. Cool. No, that's pretty cool. I think that adds a lot of flexibility, and especially for the repeatable stuff. Yeah, it's always annoying to reconfigure it every time when you know that you're using it across different workflows. So yeah, it's very helpful. Nice.
Yeah. And then maybe on a higher level, like our documentation is like pretty elaborate. Usually we try to keep it up to date. We have a Slack community where people can ask all the questions. We're usually pretty fast in answering them. And then even we also act pretty fast to user feedback. Like the custom code block is a great example. We launched it last Saturday. We already made like 20 improvements to it. Like some UI improvements, some things like didn't work as intended for some of the users when they use edge cases. And like my favorite example was like earlier this week, someone like told me, oh, we need a better way to run like a test of the code. And thought like about like maybe like a refresh context button would be helpful, like within the custom code block. And we shipped it 3 hours later, which was I was impressed with like how fast the others shipped it. And then we sent them back a screenshot, and they were very happy. We obviously can't always do that, but
yeah, of course.
We try to listen. We try to make sure that the things we're building are aligned with what our users tell us we should build, because that's the main way of how we can develop this into something actually useful. Because the best example is also like many of our users are spending way more time within FastGen than we are, because we are building it and I like do other stuff, but they like literally use this to build stuff. So sometimes like I have even like users now who like show me a cool trick that I hadn't thought of before. And it's a mutual exchange. Often like we obviously explain things, but sometimes even users show us things. We're like, oh, interesting. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, it's crazy how that happens, because when you give someone tools in their hands that are super flexible, they come up with use cases that the founders would have never imagined in their wildest dreams. In different contexts, but same thing with Notion. I don't think the developers of Notion ever thought that people would be using it for the use cases that people are using it for. It's insane what people are able to build with it, just because of flexibility. So 100%. I'm sure you see the same here. But no, this looks pretty awesome. I like how the interface is so snappy, because usually with these visual builders, one of the things that always makes me not want to use them is if they're slow to respond, and that kind of kills the flow state. And I think that's really key, which I can see here is pretty snappy. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, we almost over optimized a little for like speed and UI and UX, but we really like it. Like we think that like how we think about it is we want to make you faster, and we want to just build a very performance scalable platform, because it's very important. It needs to be secure, it needs to be scalable, it needs to like just work. But we want to achieve a state where it's fun working with it.
Exactly.
We use the slogan like happy building, not only as like a thing that you're doing, but just enjoy building, have a blast while you're doing what you want to achieve. And we try to do that in FastGen. So a lot of the improvements that we make are sometimes not strictly like features, but just like quality of life improvements, how I would call
That's
them.
amazing. I think that's a great way to approach it because, yeah, I can tell you like the biggest motivation killer is when the platform is not responding, especially when
Yeah.
you're trying to move fast. And
Yeah,
at that
yeah,
time, I move on to something else. But
100%. And
yeah,
obviously not perfect. Every now and then, sometimes it takes a bit longer, but we try to fix it ASAP. And I think that's the main thing, right? Have the core stuff always work. And then if you do additions and do experiments with, hey, maybe this could improve the experience and make it better, and then just see whether it does. And if it doesn't, you can cut it again. And if it improves the experience, then even better.
yeah, no, 100%. No, I think it's looking pretty good. And no, thanks so much for showing us around. And I'm sure people will find some inspiration with your use cases as well as a demo, because sometimes you come across a tool, but only if someone shows you how the basics work, then it's easier to get started, which I think would be very helpful. And yeah, no, I'm a fan. I'm definitely going to be using it for something, especially for cron jobs, which is always a painful thing to set up. And yeah, no, thanks again for the time and showing us around. I think it's very helpful. And I wish you all the best, man. I think you're building something really cool and there's a lot of demand. So hopefully things work out.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure being here. If you have any questions that you run into while you're building your cron jobs, just reach out.
Yeah, for sure.
And then for everyone else who tries it, if you have any feedback, improvement, anything, we literally appreciate any feedback. Even if you tell us things that don't work or that you don't like, we listen to everything and then we try to fix it. That's how we roll.
Yeah, I know that's a great way to go by building these tools. And where can people find, so fastgen.io, is that the link?
FastGen.com, actually.
.com. Got it.
We splurged a bit on the .com. So we also own FastGen.io, I think, but FastGen.com is the main URL. So FastGen.com, the docs are linked there, Slack's linked there. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing more builders joining.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Thanks so much.